Good evening. Welcome to Chelmsford's newest public affairs TV show, Chasing the Facts. I'm your host, Sam Chase, and with me tonight is Tom Boucher. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. And Tom is a vice president at Lowell 5 Savings Bank and served on Chelmsford's Tax Classification Study Committee. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that situation tonight. But first, I'd like to have Tom give us a little bit about his background, if you would.
Sure. I born and raised in Chelmsford, went through the school system, graduate of UMass, where I earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in finance and economics. Currently employed at Lowell 5 as a senior vice president of commercial lending. I've been in the banking business now for about 30 years. Active in a few things in town. I serve as the vice president for the CBA. I am past president and current member of the Chelmsford Rotary Club. And as you know, recently appointed to the EDC. And this past summer, spent my summer with the Tax Classification Committee.
You spent quite a summer with the Tax Classification Committee. Yes, yes. A little bit about that, just for a way of information for our viewers. A year or so ago, in 2017, the Board of Selectmen took their tax classification split tax rate vote. It was a 3-2 to keep a single rate. At that point, one of the selectmen, it was Glenn Diggs, who was the chairman, who became chairman later, decided to put that question of whether or not the town should have a split tax rate before the voters. There was a non-binding ballot question. The vote was 65% in favor of doing a split rate, 35% against, which actually surprised me quite a bit, that the number against was as high as it was. I would have, if he'd asked me, I would have said it's going to be a 90-10.
Sure, yeah.
But anyway, so at that point, what the selectmen decided to do when they got the ballot results back was to form a study committee, which they did. So the selectmen appointed a number of members, but the Finance Committee, the Board of Assessors, and the Chelmsford Business Association each got a representative to that committee.
Correct.
So the assessors appointed Mary Franz, Finance Committee appointed Sheila Pichette, and the Chelmsford Business Association nominated you to serve on the committee. So with that as a backdrop, maybe you could just quickly give us a little bit of your impression on how that whole process worked and unfolded.
Well, so I was selected as a representation from the CBA, but as a board member of the CBA, I am probably the only member sitting around that table that doesn't own a business and doesn't own commercial property in town. So I'm going to the table, to the committee, essentially as a residential taxpayer. Who, you know, at the end of the day, I'm tired of paying high taxes. I'd love to see my taxes drop. Like everybody, no one wants to pay more taxes, but there was one individual in the committee who would pay more taxes, wanted to pay more taxes. But so I went into this committee with the perspective of I am all for fair taxation, and I am all for not stifling economic growth. So the committee was made up of 8 members. We had 9, but Pat had to recuse herself, resigned kind of at the beginning of
Pat Wojcik, who was on the Board of Selectmen.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. Yep. So we were left with 8, and I think if you looked at the 8 of us, it was probably an even split in terms of who wanted the split rate and who was in favor of keeping the rate flat. But we didn't have a lot of time to put this study together. We were in a very compressed time frame. I think we, Mike did a great job at herding cats, so to speak. We got off track quite a bit. You were at a lot of these meetings.
Yes, I was.
I think we digressed into minutia that we didn't need to. For example, we got caught up with all of the recent federal income tax law changes and how that would impact business. And, you know, the issue is local. The issue is our town and our real estate tax base, and that's where we should have stayed. And we, like I said, we kind of digressed. We vacillated a lot in different areas I don't think we needed to go. But at the end of the day, you know, we had a group of 8 that some of us were maybe more informed than others. I think if there was more time, we could have all been a little better educated. I think we all walked away with learning something. But we decided early on that we weren't going to make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, which surprised me because I thought that was where we were going out the gate. We did, while we didn't say we were for or against splitting the rate, we did provide some guidance in the Board of Selectmen's direction. And at the end of the day, you know, it was a pretty comprehensive report that, you know, it's relatively on spot. Again, I think if we had more time, we would have probably gone a little bit of a different direction.
Okay, I think that's a very good backdrop and very accurately expressed. And as you just said, the committee did not make a recommendation for or against a split rate. But what the committee did say, and I'll read from the report here, the committee recommends that if a split rate is to be implemented or removed, it be gradually changed to the final desired value over a period of several years. This requires a long-term commitment from the Board of Selectmen and the political ability to manage the strategy across turnover of board personnel. And here's the key point, I think. Rapid shifts, whether up or down in the split rate, will cause rate shocks either on the business or residential side and should be avoided.
Yep.
Okay? So that was, and then again, the committee reiterated that position later on in the report on page 56. They say, care should be taken that any changes in the tax rates are made in a controlled and reasonable manner to minimize large swings in tax bills, whether up or down. So that essentially was the recommendation of the committee.
Yep.
So in light of that, the board took its vote, and they voted to institute a shift of 127, which means that the business community or the commercial and industrial property owners in town will pay 27% more on their tax bill. All right, so a 110 shift means a 10% increase and so forth. That's how it works. So the maximum shift allowable in Chelmsford would be 150, which would be a 50%. But a 27% shift is what they decided to implement coming out of the box. So when that happened, what was your initial reaction?
Shock and awe. I mean, honestly, it was, we were, people that I was sitting around, you know, we were shocked. We were anticipating that the rate was going to be split. We were anticipating maybe a 10% shift. Maybe 15. We in the committee had talked about, we did some scenarios. I forget whether it was 10 or 15%, but we were talking a relatively modest shift in terms of illustrating how it would impact the residential and CNI side of the equation. And to hear that 27%, certainly they didn't either read the report or care about it. That's not gradual. That's a move that, you know, that can't be reversed without a lot of pain. And perhaps, you know, it never will be, but.
I think you're right. And I think many people in town were surprised at the degree of the split. To follow up on what you just said, personally, I mean, I felt that they would probably split the rate. And we were anticipating a Board of Assessors. We talked about this a little bit and felt that the rate would be split, but we also felt that the report recommendation would be more stringently followed than it was. And I would think a 10% shift would probably fall in the area of not a severe rate shock. Anything over 15%, I think, probably out of the box is excessive. So, but anyway, that's my opinion, and that's your opinion, and that's fine. But you took it a step further. Now, the Lowell Sun editorialized on this issue on December 2nd, and they are very much, and were very much in favor of Chelmsford instituting a split rate. And they said, a local tax system should be fair to all parties. I think we can all agree with that.
Sure, yeah.
Now, here's their conclusion from that statement. There is no better way to achieve that goal than a split tax classification system, where selectmen, based on accurate information provided by the assessors, can adjust the tax shift equitably from year to year. Okay? So, that is the Sun's position, and I will tell you that in my memory, which goes back about 20 years, in the political realm of the town, the Sun has editorialized twice on Chelmsford implementing a split tax rate. This time that I just talked about recently, and several years ago, probably 8 or 9 years ago that I recall, when the issue was hot, they wrote a similar editorial. I've been reading the Lowell Sun for 40 years, and I have never seen another editorial on another community's split tax rate.
Wow.
They do not editorialize about Westford. Westford, you need to implement a split rate. Tingsboro, you need to implement a split rate. Drake, you need to implement a split rate. I have never seen another editorial.
What's the beef with
Only
Chelmsford?
Chelmsford. I do not understand it. So you responded
Yes, I did.
with a letter which was very well written, very comprehensive, discussing the issues, and the Sun did not print your letter.
Correct.
Okay? And one of the things you said in your letter was that the selectmen elected to do a 27% shift, a 27% increase in the business tax bill. In doing so, the board chose to ignore the advice of its own 2018 Tax Classification Study Committee, which was, if they chose to implement a split rate, they do so gradually over time to avoid causing rate shocks. And then you go on to characterize the 127 shift as a dramatic rate shock,
Yep.
which I would agree with that. I think it is. So any thoughts that you might have on why the Sun might not have published your letter?
Well, I made it a point to send it to every editor at the paper, so that someone would see it, knowing that they seem to have a grudge against Chelmsford. I did get a response from one of the editors. I don't recall his name. He's the daytime editor, I believe, and his response was, "Well, we got your letter. Thank you. I'm sorry we cannot publish it the way it is because it's too long. And I know we've allowed this to happen in the past, but we cannot allow it anymore." And he said, if you can hone it down to 250 words, then we'll see if we can put it in print. If you can't, then we could still put it online. And my response to him was, listen, I spent a lot of time composing that letter. It needs to be said the way it is, and I can't shrink that down to 250 words, so I'll take the online version. Mm-hmm. And they've yet to do that.
Well, I think that's fairly said, and it's interesting that apparently the response was, we've had a change in policy, because I know in the past they have published very lengthy letters. I've written a couple myself to the Sun when I was on the Board of Selectmen, and I don't recall that they changed a single word. And one letter I wrote several years ago was probably about twice as long as the one you wrote. So
wow.
Apparently they've had a change in their editorial policy in that regard.
Recent change.
It's too bad, because I think the interaction that you get from the public via input through letters is important. And it's not like the Lowell Sun is a 50 or 60 page paper every day.
Right.
Okay, so I don't quite understand that, but I'm not in that business, so we'll just let that sit. Now, from your perspective in your business life, what is the effect on commercial property owners in paying higher taxes than they otherwise might pay? So, for example, in a split rate, in the city of Lowell, for example, they shifted a 175 rate. So that says that if your business property is in Lowell you are paying 75% more on your tax bill than you would under a unified rate. So, and that is the extreme situation. The 175 shift is the maximum that a community can implement. So from your perspective in commercial dealings with the bank and dealing with commercial property owners, what kind of an effect do you think that has?
Well, I've got an earful over the past few months. In particular, I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with one of the largest employers in town last week. One of the executives of this national firm said that their taxes are going up $170,000 a year with the real estate that they own.
As a result of the 127 shift?
As a result of the 27% shift.
Do you want to give me that number again? How much was that?
$170,000.
170. That's.
I've got more.
That's worth talking about.
That's worth talking about. So, you know, they're a national firm, and the message that he received from corporate is, why did we come to Chelmsford? I heard that, and that just, it really just put a real tough gut reaction. It's hard to hear those kind of things. Why did we come to Chelmsford? And that's not what we should be doing right now, right? I mean, that's the whole point of having Lisa on board now and redistricting or putting the new zoning overlay on 129. We're trying to attract businesses, but this is doing the opposite. There's another one of my clients who recently added onto their building, increased the valuation of the property, and they're in a business where they accept payments from state agencies, and they're in a system where they cannot increase their fees. Their taxes went up $50,000
So that cannot be passed on.
Can't be passed on.
That's a direct absorption under the overhead cost of the business.
In both of those examples, for instance, with the national firm I was mentioning, $170,000 in increased taxes means that they're making payroll cuts. And I suspect the same thing is going to happen with this other example, that, you know, they've got to make cuts to make up the difference because they can't pass that along.
Yeah. Just because a business has a cost increase does not, whether it's taxes or anything, doesn't matter. It doesn't automatically mean they can pass it on to the consumer, because prices are set by supply and demand.
Yep.
Okay, and that's just the way it works. So that's a good lead-in. I'd like to play the first clip that we have. And this is an interview that we had with Selectman Glenn Diggs about 4 weeks ago on this show. So let's take a look and see what the effect is on 3 residential properties in Chelmsford. And I'm going to use my own property as an example, and I picked that to lend some credibility to my discussion here. This is my property. This is all public information, so we're not giving away any secrets. And my property value happens to be very, very close to the average single-family residence value, so it's a good example. So last year I paid $7,019 in tax, a little over $7,000. This year, because of the split rate, I'm going to pay $6,802. So I'm going to save $217 versus what I paid last year. Okay, so in that example, and that's exactly right. I am the average value single-family residence in town. So as a result of this split that the board instituted, I'm going to save a little over $200. Now, if we can have the second clip. Now we'll look at a small business that's near the center, but because that property value is over $1 million, which is the threshold for the small commercial exemption, that particular property is not eligible. So that property owner is going to bear the full brunt of the split. So in 2018, he paid $21,694. In 2019, he's going to pay $28,629. So his tax is going to go up by almost $7,000 versus what he paid last year. So I guess the question is my $217 a year's tax saving worth taxing that small business owner an extra $7,000 a year?
And my answer is yes,
Okay.
when you look back at the reason for the split.
Okay, so the answer is yes. So my $200 savings is worth, to get my $200 a year savings, we have to tax a small business who is worth slightly, the property's worth slightly over $1 million. He has to pay an extra $6,900
Yep.
a year to get me my
200.
thing. Now, to be fair, and I didn't want to play the clip, but what Selectman Diggs went on to say was that he felt that that was a fair situation because, in his opinion, for years, we've had a natural shift of value away from the commercial toward the residential. So residential was picking up more of a percentage of the tax burden,
Yep.
and that was the justification. But he went on to say that because that was the justification, the board, future boards need to look at that situation every year. And if the natural value shifts away from the residential toward the commercial, which it did between the years of 2006 and 2012, that's what happened, the board must be willing to ratchet the shift back and even go back to a unified rate. And I'll take Selectman Diggs at his word. I believe he was sincere. He really believes that that's what should be done, and he punctuated that by saying, you know what, sometimes when you're a selectman, you have to do what's unpopular because it's the right thing to do. So I take him at his word. I think he's sincere.
Yep.
Now, in your opinion, however, do you think politically it's realistic to assume that a future board is going to do much to discontinue the split or even roll that back somewhat?
Well, he is right in saying, you know, the residential valuation has gone up a lot more than the commercial value.
In the last 5 years, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, and quite frankly, all of the residents, all the property, all the residential property owners have benefited from those value increases. We can all be happy to, you know, we can all look at our bank accounts and say, hey, we've got a lot more equity in our properties today.
Especially when you go to sell the property.
That's right, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, there's always two sides to the equation. So, you know, I asked a question at the committee. I went around the table. I said, okay, anybody want to see their property values go down? Not one raised their hand. You know,
Not surprising.
right? I think, in general, what he is saying makes sense, but we've gone through such an extreme. You can't just. This isn't a pendulum. You can just swing back and forth at such a extreme level. I think if we went forward with a smaller split, then perhaps maybe that could happen down the road. But you're not going to write 27% quickly. I don't think. Without a lot of pain.
Right, and I haven't talked to the other selectmen about this, but I know what I would do if I were on the board. If I were a supporter of a single rate, okay, and I were elected to the board in this next election cycle, and I looked to see what they did a 127 shift, I would go back to your tax classification report, and I'd read it very carefully, and it is a great read, and it's a great report, and it has a lot of good technical information in it about how property assessments are done and so forth. So it's an excellent report. But I would go back and I'd look at the report and I'd say, you know what? These people spent a lot of time studying this issue, and their recommendation is that we shouldn't have large swings in a split situation. So even if I were elected to the board as a single rate guy, I think in the next, when the vote comes up in next December, I'd say there's no way I can recommend going back to a single rate.
You can't.
It's too much of a, it would be too much of an impact on the homeowner. So I might say, okay, I recommend a minimum residential factor that'll bring us back to 122, maybe, okay? But I'd have to look at the numbers if I wanted to go back to a single rate. So I think one of the things the board did was they put the thing high enough so that it would have an impact in the current tax year. People would see a change. And in my case, you saw, $217. That's nice.
I didn't notice it when I got my bill.
Well, some people didn't. And full disclosure, if the audience doesn't know it, I happen to be on the Board of Assessors. And so I was privy to a lot of the calls and emails and so forth that came in when the tax bills went out. And the gist seems to be people were somewhat surprised. The ones who knew about the split, they were surprised because I guess they were anticipating a larger saving year over year.
Correct, yep.
But of course what happened was that residential property values appreciated at a pretty good clip. I think the average...
Levy goes up.
Yeah, the average was around 10%.
Yep.
Some were higher, obviously. And then the levy goes up 2.5% every year as allowed by the law. And so that combination, the year-over-year savings wasn't that apparent to a lot of people. Yep. And actually, in a couple cases, people's bills went up. Now, to be fair, if they hadn't had the split, their bill might have gone up $500 or $600. But with the split, it went up $100, okay? But that's not how people look at it. They look to see, what did I pay last
Perception.
year? What am I paying this year? Nobody sits there and says, gee, if we had a single rate, I would have paid more. You know, maybe 1 out of 1,000 people would say that, you know. So
that was a
that was the effect.
vote of contention at the committee level for a couple of meetings.
Right.
And it's true, it's perception. You know, you are getting a break, but you're not seeing it.
That's right. That's right. And once you assuming the board goes forward and keeps that mentality of trying to adjust the levy share back and forth, and at some point they might hit the statutory maximum, which is a 150 shift, and at that point they can't do anything else.
Yep.
And then the political thing is completely lost at that point, because every year people's tax bills are going to go up.
Yep.
You know? So, and that's the way it's going to go. So we've had a great discussion here, and I appreciate your input, and I certainly appreciate your service on the Tax Classification Committee. But you've also, as you said in your intro, you've been recently appointed to the Economic Development Commission.
Yeah.
Which I also happen to be on.
Yep.
I think it was a great pick. So
Thank you.
So what do you see in the future of the town for? What do you think we ought to be doing?
Oh, geez.
Notwithstanding the split tax rate, what do you think we ought to be doing?
Well, I got to tell you, I am really excited to be part of this group, and Lisa is a crackerjack. I've been to a couple of meetings where we've gone out to see some of the local business owners, and she gets it. She knows where we need to go. She has access to resources for small business, and she's aggressive. So, you know, in terms of her business development skills, we have an opportunity here to attract businesses to town. And, you know, we've got a pretty good-sized speed bump in the way right now, but, you know, with her acumen and the recent zoning overlay on 129, you know, we should be able to do some damage there. And we're talking about Route 40 now. Who knows where that's going to go? But to me, that's a clean canvas that we could go in and redevelop real easily into something special.
You've almost actually, you could make the argument on Route 40 that it's already de facto commercially zoned.
Right.
Okay,
That's
just by the physical characteristics and what's going on and what precedes it in Westford, coming up that whole corridor and so forth. So yeah.
Yep. So there's a lot of opportunity for us if the townspeople want to go down this road. Let's face it, Chelmsford. I've been here all my life. It's not the same town it was when I grew up here. You know, there are no more cows in town. You know,
and I'm going to be nice. I'm not even going to ask you how long that was.
Well, it's been
I've
a
been
while.
here 40 years, and I'm a blow-in. So
Yeah, I've got you beat
go.
by 18 years, and I'm not a blow-in.
So I kind of did ask him.
There
the
you go,
question.
right?
All right.
Roundabout answer. You know, we're not the same town, and I think most of the people, I still have friends that I went to school with that are still in town, and you know, we all see the town as something different now, and I think we're all willing to accept that we're not that sleepy little bedroom community anymore, and let's bring in some businesses. Let's stop driving to Nashua or Burlington to you know, go shopping and eat. Let's bring it to Chelmsford. You know, let's make this place special. We've got the proximity of highways, north, south, east, and west. We're, you know, half an hour, 40 minutes from Boston, 40 minutes from Manchester. We got a great place to make special, and we can do it by bringing in businesses, pushing or lifting that commercial tax base up, and giving the residential taxpayers a break.
Great, Tom, and thanks for being on the show. You're a great
Pleasure.
guest, and we'll continue to work together on EDC issues.
All right.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.